All right, it looks like it's just after 2. We can go ahead and get started. I think the participant count looks like it's kind of slowly stopping, moving up. So before we get started, I did want to point out again, we have some sample a sample document this time, as well as the slides that I'm using today. They are available at the same website we used last time, which is a11y.okabletech.org/downloads. And I will also put that again in the chat. We have realized recently that Zoom only shows you chat since you have logged in. So any of you that logged in since I last put it in probably are not seeing it. So I'll give people a second to download those documents before we really dive into the content. And if you have any trouble with the downloads, just let me know. It should be a single PDF and a PowerPoint file. All right. Looks like I'm not getting any questions. So I'll kind of go ahead and get started. And if anybody does happen to have issues with the link, I'll put it in there one more time for those of you that just arrived. And we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so thank you guys for joining in this third session in the Accessible PDF series. Today we are going to cover lists and tables within PDF. We'll kind of get into the meat of how these work and how to make them fully accessible in Acrobat, and also talk a little bit about what comes out of a Word document and what you still might need to correct once it comes into a PDF format. And my PowerPoint never likes to work first right out of the box. So let's try that again. All right, so to recap what we've done so far, we've gotten Acrobat Pro DC set up so it's ready to move around the tags and everything like that. We've learned how to move and edit tags. We have added alt text to images and figures, and we've used the reading order tool to tag content. So all of that was setting you up to be able to do what we're going to do today. There's really nothing new to add other than we'll talk about adding a layer to those tags and how we look at that, the reading order of those particular elements we're covering today, which are lists and tables. So I really wanted to make or draw a connection to the idea of nesting dolls. The difference with lists and tables that is present, or that, the difference that's present is that these require a little bit more of the idea of nesting. So we talked about buckets and containers last time we met, and this really takes it a step further. We have these lists that have different items underneath them, and then potentially even secondary lists that are as those list items. Same with tables. We have rows that are nested under table, the main table itself, and then data cells within those. So it's a little bit different concept than what we've been doing before, and that's why it's kind of taking up a whole hour today. So to start off, I wanted to go ahead and do another quick quiz like we did last time. And I have two different list structures that are showing on the screen. The first, so number one, is a list tag, which is just abbreviated with an L, that has 4 different paragraph tags underneath it, nested underneath it. The second is a list tag, which is again an L tag, with a list item, which is abbreviated LI. And within that list item body, I'm representing one list item, within that list item, I'm representing one list item body, which is abbreviated L body. So thinking back to the descriptions I just gave you, which of these do you think is the proper way to structure a list? All right, I'm getting a whole bunch of number 2s, so you guys are doing excellent so far. All right. Awesome job, guys. Okay, so that is indeed correct, the second one. And that is because by adding those list item and thus an also nested list item body tags, we have begun correctly nesting those list tags. So I will show you one step further because there's one other thing we can do to make this even more accessible depending upon the type of content we have, but we'll kind of do that more in the demonstration. But keep in mind there's kind of one other level we can go, like one level higher than what I've even displayed here. Okay, so with that, I'm actually going to move into my PDF. Hopefully everyone's seeing my PDF screen now. I have trouble with my screen switching on me sometimes. Okay, so looks like no one's saying no, so that's a good sign. All right, so we'll start off with this idea of lists. And so I've actually included 3 different lists in the document that I have posted on the website. And we'll kind of go over each of these individually. So the first one, and there's some paragraph text around that, so you can kind of ignore that for now. But we have, as we're scanning through the document, we see that this first list we encounter, it's not marked as a list at all in the tags. And it doesn't even have any bullets or numbers as well. So this one just came out of Word. I just used tabs to move it over and did it a little bit, and that's all I did to it. So when we look into our tag tree, kind of move this up a little. I'm going to go find that list in the tag tree by just navigating to this paragraph tag that's below the first 2 main paragraphs. And that's what's actually containing our first item in our list, which is apples. And you can tell that because we have this pink highlight that's showing that content is selected in the tag tree. All right, so we see that these are each individually tagged as a paragraph because that's what they came out of Word as. That's what the PDF converter recognized them as. So we can actually make this a list with just a couple of steps to get it into the format that's the, I guess, the easiest and quickest way to be accessible without going as far as that third level that we'll kind of get to. All right, so this is going to cover something new really quick. But we're going to create a new tag, which is something we haven't done before. So the best way to do this is to kind of find where you want to put the new tag below, and start your new tag creation from that tag. So in this case, we want to look to that paragraph above apples. So I'll highlight that one right now. So right now we have the paragraph that's above our list highlighted, and the tag tree, and it's showing on the PDF content as well. So now to add a new tag, we can go to that paragraph tag that we have selected. We can do a right click to get that context menu up, and then we click on new tag. When we do that, a new window comes up, it's in the center of my screen, but we're going to search through those using the drop-down menu to find the list tag. And once we've found that, we'll click the list, type, and then click OK. So if we were watching the tag tree, we would have seen that this new list tag has been created. So again, that list tag is now abbreviated using an L. So it's just an L between 2 brackets, and that's our list tag. The next thing that we can do is actually work on our paragraph tags. So just another quick little quiz for you guys. These are paragraph tags right now, but what should they be labeled instead? List item. Awesome. You guys are on the money. All right, so we do need to make these list tags. And we can do that a couple of different ways. I'll just show you one, and then I'll show you kind of a quicker way to do it so that you can get the hang of both options. But if you just want to change one tag, you can right-click and go to Properties and change it to the List Items tag. And then we'll click Close. So when we did that, now we have our list item. Now notice that it's still not technically nested. It's still next to that list item. So we still have another step to go, even after we get all of the rest of the list items changed over to list items. Okay, so if we wanted to change all of those tags at once, from paragraph tags to list item tags, we can actually use either the Shift key or the Control key, or I guess it would be Command on Mac, to highlight all of those paragraph tags that we want to change. So right now I'm clicking on the paragraph tag that contains the oranges text, and I'm going to hit my Shift key and hold it down, and then I will go further down to where I know that bananas tag is. That sounded kind of funny when I said it. But anyway, I will click I click the mouse key again to select all of those. And then I will do the same thing and open a right-click context menu and click Properties. And then change that to List Item. And then I'll click Close. So we just did all of those three, and I'll highlight them again, in one fell swoop. So if we had done that before, then creating this list in this format would have taken really just a few clicks. So once we have that done, we can now use that new little trick we just learned to highlight all of our list item tags that we just created and move those over into this list tag. And I mentioned copy paste before, so I'll go ahead and show you that one as well. This is where the paste child comes in really handy. So if we can either do a right click and click cut, or we can just do Control X or Command X on our keyboard, and it'll actually highlight, cut all of those list item tags to be ready to play, or so they are ready to be placed somewhere else. So in this case, we want to put them underneath that list tag, so we'll right click and click Paste Child. And so now you can see that there's been a change with this list tag. It now has an arrow next to it, so we can open and close it and see that we have nested successfully our list item tags for our apples, oranges, lemons, and bananas text. And I wanted to point out one more thing. It'll come back to me at some point. So this is the quick way to create a list if you've been given a list that doesn't have any structure at all. It's coming in as just paragraphs. Let me go down. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions on that or need me to repeat anything? Okay, I'm getting a question, so no L body. And that is a really good question. So to answer that, in the standards that we have for PDF, which are PDF UA, there is a difference between shall and must. So the shall applies to our list item tags. So we have to have those. That's something that's non-negotiable. We must have our list item tags. The L body is something that we may have. And you know, if we're remediating PDFs at AbleTech, we do go as far as making those list item body tags. But in a pinch, if you don't have the time to finish out making the L body tags underneath these list item tags, then this is okay. It will suffice. All right, and I hope that answered your question. Okay, so another question is, what was the term you used to paste the list items? I used the paste child, and let me, and I might have mentioned this last time, but I think it bears repeating. Those of you who've worked in PDF remediation at all may have already noticed this, but if you haven't, the tag tree and the reading order tree now will work with the Control Z. So if I hit Control Z, it undoes what I just did. So anyway, I can do that again, and I'll use a Control X to cut those, and then I'll do a paste child to put them back under my list. But that undo functionality, I learned about it a couple of years ago, and I think that, I don't know, I was probably crying for joy. That is one of the things that has been super useful since that came out. Okay. All right, so let's move on to our second list. And this is actually one I just tagged properly in Word. Not tagged it, I marked it up with the list structure in Word. And this is what came out of it. So we have our list. It's just the same terms, I just gave them numbers this time. So we have our L body tag this time that contains that number 1 and the apples. So just a minute ago, when we first started, I was mentioning that we can actually go a level further with lists if we want to. And that is to make the bullet or the number into a label. So again, this is one of those things, it's not a must, it's a shall. I'm sorry, it's a may. I think I get must and shall confused, but anyway, you can create labels if it works for you, and that's still, you know, if you talk to somebody like Common Look, that they're the one of the big PDF remediation tools. That's actually how their tool nests lists, and they really rep that pretty hard. But anyway, we can do that if we want. So I'm going to do that on one of these just to illustrate what it looks like, because this is where we need to split our tags into multiple tags. So this, instead of being in one L body tag, will need to be in 2 tags, and then we'll change that one to be a label. Okay. Let me get my reading order tool up, and I'll zoom in a little bit. So if I get my reading order tool up, I can actually highlight the 1, and I'm going to make that a text paragraph tag. And you may notice the reason I actually made it a paragraph tag instead of doing something with a list is because it doesn't actually have a list or label tag or a list item tag or any of the list tags within the reading order tool. So that's the way I kind of handled it for this time. And then once we have that split off, we can actually just go back to our properties menu and make it into a label. And now that is the absolute best way you can represent lists with the tags. Okay. You guys are asking some awesome questions, and I definitely will get to those as we go through. Or if not, I can definitely follow up afterwards. Okay, so that was just one example of how you can further split this out to have the tags really represent your structure. And I had another last example of a list down below. And this is what we consider a complex list. So it's basically got a list that's nested under another list item. So if you encounter one of these that's not tagged, you can follow the same principles we've already discussed, just this nesting idea. And know that Word does handle this pretty well coming out of the box. I didn't do anything to this one. This just came out of Word. So we don't have those label tags just like we didn't with the previous list, but we do have the nesting done properly. So I'm expanding this just to show you what it looks like. The first list item is the number 1, which is fruits, and it contains all the list items we've been dealing with in the previous list. And underneath the list item body tag, it actually has that number 1 in fruits content. And then it also has the second list, it's child list basically that's underneath it. And then the structure would be kind of the same from there. So it's got those 4 different list items within it. So this is really the only thing you need to know about nested list, is that that nested list goes within that list item body tag. And the rest of it functions exactly the same as it would have. So I know it starts to look a little confusing because it's getting kind of long in the tooth in the tag tree, but that's really the same thing across the board. And you will have this document to refer back to if you need an example of a complex table. All right, so I do want to answer one of the questions I saw. Occasionally I get documents with list items that contain multiple paragraphs. How should that be handled? So let me just pretend that this is multiple paragraphs instead of a secondary list. So say we've got 2 paragraphs and they're all about apples and oranges. And that's probably not the best example, but trying to figure out how to describe it without having to go create a document and then show you. But those list items would contain both of the paragraph tags. Like, that's how I would do it. I would actually take, for instance, if, well, I do have 2 empty paragraphs here. So you would leave these paragraph tags as they are, and then put those both under your label, your list item body tags. That's, I think, the best way to handle that. So that way a screen reader might still pause when it gets to that other paragraph. It still at least knows that they're 2 separate chunks, but that they go with that same list item body. I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, please follow up with me and I can definitely send you an example. I know sometimes this stuff is much easier to see in action. All right. Awesome. All right, any more questions on lists? Okay, looks like not. So we'll go ahead and move over into our tables section. All right, so tables work much the same way that lists do with regards to nesting. So again, I have an example on the screen, and I'll kind of briefly describe both of them. Number 1 has a table tag with 1 table row expanded, and in it, it has 3 table headings, which are abbreviated with TH. The table row is abbreviated TR. The table tag is actually normal, it's just spelled out. Not sure why they made that call, but they did. Number 2 is another table tag with a table row, abbreviated TR, below it. And then inside of that table row are nested 3 table data tags. So given what you know kind of tables, like think back to what you learned in Word, which one of these is correct, number 1 or number 2? And I can describe again if needed. Number 1. Getting all ones. All right, you guys are on to me. All right, yes, so the number 1 option is correct because that first table row is representative of the header row for that table. So each of those particular cells needs to have a table header tag assigned to it so that it can begin to be read properly by a screen reader. So to show you an example of what we consider more of a simple table, this is just a table that has lists of classes. So it's got class name, professor, and the days of the week. And the row can actually be considered a column, or the first column in the table can also be considered a row header as well. So in this case, we have microbiology, calculus, and English. So those can actually be considered row headers, since the information in those headers applies across the rest of the row. But it's still considered a simple table because it's got one of each. So when a screen reader encounters this, if it's got the table headers assigned for both the column and the row, it's going to have a good chance of reading this pretty well. But take it against a complex table. This complex table has several merged cells. It's got multiple rows of headers. So we have, it looks like 2 rows of headers, and then let me get that straight in my head for a second. 1 column of row headers, and then we have 2 rows of column headers. That sounds like a bit of a tongue twister, doesn't it? But we'll kind of get into editing this table, and so I hope some of that starts to make a little bit more sense as we go through the examples. So this is really where PDF shines in terms of being able to make a table accessible. Now, you may remember from either one of my sessions, or even if you were able to watch some of the office sessions where we talked about complex versus simple tables. And it's really always easiest for you as the creator or the person remediating these documents to work with a simple table rather than one of those complex tables. But we know that's just not necessarily the real world, and sometimes complex tables have to be used for whatever reason. So we have to think about how we can make those as accessible as possible. So PDF does give us the ability to make complex tables accessible. We just have to know the table editor pretty well and start to be able to make the structure make sense to a screen reader. So the table editor itself is used to add header scope for either the row or the column. You also add spans for any merged cells. And then one of the newer features is that you can actually auto-generate header IDs, which is basically what says, or what takes a single data cell and associates it to each of the headers that it corresponds to. So the header IDs should auto-generate, and I say should because we all know PDF is, or Acrobat is a little finicky sometimes. And then once they're auto-generated, then you can take them and actually apply them to each of the data cells. So this will be a fair amount of work to do. I left this slide in here just for your reference, but you can open the table editor a couple of ways, and I think it makes more sense if we go ahead and move over into our PDF again and just start demonstrating. All right. So on the second page, we have several different tables. These are actually the same tables that we showed in the PowerPoint, but we can clearly kind of look through them a little more thoroughly in this case. So the first example was an example of a table that I took or that I created in Word, and I purposefully didn't mark it up with that header row that you guys have heard about. So, oh, open the wrong tag. So that is, let me highlight the table. So this is the first table in the tag tree is the one we're focusing on right now. If we open the first row, then you can see that this is the table that was in our example. So it actually has table data cells marked. It does not have any table header cells. So we can fix that a couple of ways, but why don't we go ahead and just go into the table editor first, and we'll start looking at what that entails. So like I mentioned, you can open this 2 ways. I'll show you the reading order tool first. You click reading order tool. It should open, and again, this is one of those should things. Looks like it's not. Anyway, you click the table editor button, They were trying to improve it to where you could kind of just click on the table, but I can't get that to work all the time. So when we have our table editor open, the only thing that changes visually is that we see some red boxes appear over this table. And when we start changing the headers and the spans and things, those colors are going to start to shift. And of course, this isn't the most accessible way of doing it. They do only have things in the table editor marked with color, unfortunately. You can turn on another option, but then it kind of clutters, so it sort of depends on what you need out of this tool. And actually, while we're here, I'll show you how to do that. If you right-click, once you have the table editor open, and you go to your table editor options, you can select Show Cell Type, Table Header, or Table Data. And once we have that turned on, now you can see what these are actually marked as in the tag tree. Okay, so I'll show you that one more time. Let's click on Reading Order Tool, and kind of, in my case, it was all grayed out, so I just clicked on the content on the table itself, and it actually let me open the table editor there. The easier way, though, if you work in the Reading Order Tool, you may have this open a lot, but if you tend to work more in the tag tree, the method I just showed you may not be your favorite. But the way you can open the table editor from the tag tree is actually to right-click on the table tag of the table you want to edit and click Table Editor. You can also, and they actually show you the short key out to the side, it's Q. So if you wanted to right-click and then just click Q, you can do that, and it also opens the table editor. That was a newer feature they added a couple years ago as well. So it's a little bit easier to get to than it used to be. All right, so once we have that open, now we can start making the edits that we need to. So what we're going to do in this table is mark these column headers as headers and these row headers as headers, and also apply the appropriate span. So we're going to start over in the left-hand side with class name. So I'm just clicking on the, or right-clicking on the class name cell, and then clicking Table Cell Properties. When we get that open to the table cell properties themselves, we see we have a couple of options in here. We have the radio buttons to change it from a data cell to a header cell. And when we click header cell, because that is what we want to change it to, we see there's a scope drop down as well. And that is where we'll actually assign it as a column header. And since this is a simple table, there are no merged headers or cells at all, we can actually leave the rest of this blank, even the cell IDs. Screen readers are pretty good at picking up on the header rows, especially if it's a simple table. So this, what we just did actually makes it that single class name header cell good to go. So we'll need to finish the table out. And just like we did with the list a little while ago, we can actually multiple select these table cells and make them headers at the same time. We can do that within the table editor as well. So you can either click Shift, I believe, and select the cells individually, or you can kind of take your mouse and draw a line and select the cells that you want to edit in a batch. So I'll do that one more time. I'm going to click on Professor, and then I'm going to hold my Shift key and click Days of the Week. So it's pretty small, but there is a blue line that shows you that you have selected those, so you can kind of get an idea of what you're going to edit before you do. They still probably need to make some improvements with that. All right, so we'll do the same with these two cells we have selected as we did with that first column header cell. And we'll right-click click Table Cell Properties, change that to a header cell, assign a scope of column, and click OK. All right, so when we did that, you might have noticed the colors changed. So what it's actually doing, it's kind of trying to use the color to help you know which you've marked as headers and which you haven't. So as you start to mark things up, it can give you a visual indication, if you're able to see the color difference, that you kind of have the table in the proper shape. But you may have also noticed, and I'll point this out kind of for those who haven't, but the lines aren't exactly spot on. It tries to guess where your content starts and stops, but it doesn't always get it right. So that's why we have this table cell that's kind of off to the left from where it actually starts. So this isn't always going to look perfect, but at least tries to help you with a little visual guide. Whether or not it's great, you know, that's up for debate, but there you go. Okay, so next thing we need to do for this table, we can mark these row headers as, in fact, row headers again, so the same thing. So this time, I'm going to actually draw a line with my mouse just to kind of show you what that looks like. And I literally just did a line you can kind of expand to a box, and that actually lets you highlight those cells just the same. And I will also make another note. As far as I know, this tool is not keyboard accessible. Unfortunately, I need to follow up with Rob Haverty, who's the head of PDF. I took a course with him, so luckily he said, hey, you can contact with bugs or anything, but I'd like to ask him again if there's any feedback on that, because we have gotten a few questions lately. But unfortunately, it's not very friendly to keyboards. Okay. So what we'll do now that we have those 3 cells highlighted, and I'll zoom in a little bit again so you can see that I have microbiology, calculus, and English selected. And I'll do the same thing. I'll right click within one of those, click Table Cell Properties, make those into header cells using the radio button, and make them into row headers. And I click OK. And those then change to table header cells, as we can see with our little table header key, and they turned red as well. So now this table, since it's simple, is good to go. And I just click save, by the way. So I think I mentioned saving early and saving often. It's a good practice to do. All right, do I have any questions on that table? Doesn't appear so. Awesome. Okay, I hope that means I told you guys, you know, everything you need to know, so you're all happy. Okay, so I wanted to make a brief, quick note before we move on to complex tables, which we probably won't get all the way through, but that's okay. So this table that I have below, the one we just worked on, is the same table, except in this case, I actually marked it, or I created it in Word using tabs. So I only mention these just because we have seen these in the wild. This is something you'd have to tag more manually unless you have a tool like CommonLink. But it would require you to kind of split things out. So just like we did with that label and that list item earlier, you could use your reading order tool, or you could also, I believe I showed you guys this last time, but if you use your cursor, you can highlight text and create a new tag from selection. And in that case, that wasn't the best option to do because it put in the same one that was already in. But if we create a new tag, I'm covering this pretty quickly, so sorry if it gets a little convoluted. So when we make our new tag, that's where we'd actually want to place our content. So I'll highlight that, do a right click on my new tag, and click, well, this never likes to work. So this is why I don't show it very often. Create tag from selection. Okay, so that is an option that you have if you ever encounter a table like this. And I'm getting a question, would class name be both a table header and a row header? That's a good question. So class name doesn't describe the content that's to the right of it. It's kind of a standalone from these three, so it would actually just be a column header. Okay, one more thing to note before we move on to our complex table. I wanted to point out that, and I have the most up-to-date version of Adobe Acrobat Pro DC, and I have Office 365, which I use on my desktop. That version of Word does allow you to mark row headers. It's called first column in the table settings. So we had recently discussed this, and I just wanted to point it out to those of you who might be interested. It actually does mark those row headers as table headers within Acrobat when you do a conversion. And I use the PDF version of the converter as well, so using the file save as PDF option. So they are still trying to make improvements for that for tables that do have row headers as well. You would still, to make this fully accessible, need to go in and assign those scopes, because that doesn't happen automatically still. One of these days, hopefully it will. But as of right now, it'll just mark the header cells for you, and then you have one step left to go. Okay, so let's focus on the complex table now. So this is where we have a little more of the complexity, and we start to have to do a little bit more work since this did come in as a fully complex table. So we'll start right in. We'll get our table editor open. And we can see that it looks like none of these table headers were marked. So we could approach this with a couple of different strategies. You could kind of select all of the header cells at once and mark them as header cells, and then go back and take a fine tooth to applying which scope they have, or you could do it one by one. It's kind of up to you. But let's just talk through this a little bit first. So the row that has salesperson, first quarter 2015, second quarter 2015, and so on, those are all going to be column headers. And then the row below that, that's got the months of the year, January, February, so on, those are also going to be column headers. The row headers that we have are Susan, Bill, and Jeff. And I didn't include any row or headers that would span both column and row, just to kind of keep this one a little bit more simple. If you'd like an example of that, of course, you can always follow up with me and we can talk about one that even has a little bit more complexity than this one. Okay, so what we need to do, and we'll have one addition here that we didn't before, but these are merge cells. So what these are doing, they are column headers, but they're spanning 3 columns. So that's really the hardest part of remediating this table, is getting those, it all figured out, what column headers go where, which row headers go where, and what their scopes are. So once you've kind of done that, you've got a game plan, so you can start editing. So I will, let's just go one by one. So I'm going to start with salesperson. Let me get this a little bigger. We're going to go into our table cell properties. Mark this as a header cell. Set the scope of column. And this one is spanning just one column and just one row, so we don't need to do anything to it beyond that for now. Then we'll move over to first quarter 2015. We'll right click open table cell properties on this one. We'll make it a header cell. We'll change the scope to column, and we'll add a column span of 3. Oh, I put 4. And then we'll click OK. You're going to get this error, but you know what you're doing. You've already made your game plan, right? So you can actually click proceed and it'll be all okay. Does look like a pretty gnarly error though. All right, so we'll move on and do the rest of those. So just to speed things up a little bit, I'm actually gonna mark these last 3 all at once. So since they're all column headers that span 3 columns, we can go ahead and do that in one fell swoop. We can click table cell properties and make them header cells with a scope of column and a column span of 3. We'll get the error again. We can click OK. And you can see the colors are starting to change for us. So it's starting to figure out what's what as we're changing things. The last column header that we have is annual total. And if we right click that and click table cell properties, we can make it a header cell with a scope of column and leave the row and column span as they are. All right, so that means our first row is done. So let's start in on our months. So again, these are actually all the same. So to make this quicker, again, I'm gonna select all of those. And that didn't work. There we go. Now they're blue. We've just selected January through December. We're going to right click open table cell properties, make those headers with a scope of column. And they just span 1 row and 1 column. And we'll click OK. So those just turned red for us too, so we can see their table headers marked as well. The last bit of header work that we need to do before we move to the ID idea is make our names into row headers. So I'm going to multiple select those and change those again. And click OK. And now we are all of our headers are now applied. Okay. Now that we've done that, I'm going to click save, and that should be a lot of the work that we need to do for this one. All right, so again, this is kind of baseline accessibility. If you get it to this point, chances are good it's going to be read pretty well by a screen reader, but we can go a step further. So if we we'll start in on our data cells, and we'll kind of work our way out from there. And I know we're at, let's see, 10 till, so I think I should be able to get through this in about 5 minutes. Oh, whoa. I must have clicked something really wrong just now. All right, let's get our table editor back open. And okay, we'll start in with this table data cell, and I'll just demonstrate this a couple of times just for sake of time. But we'll click auto generate header cell ID since we do have our headers already added. And that didn't look like it did anything, but now when we go in to add our IDs, we should have options to choose from. So if we right click on that again, go back into our table cell properties, we see where we're going to be working now is associated header cell IDs. So on this particular number, it's related to January and Susan and first quarter. So let me click the add button, and we will go manually add each of those. So we're going to look for January 1st, And I tend to, when I'm doing this kind of work, I tend to work from the closest one to it up. You may find it easier to do it the other way around, but I try to find the one that's closest and work from there. So we'll add that, click OK. We'll add Susan next. And then we'll add first quarter. All right, and then we'll click OK. So now that data cell has been associated to each of the 3 headers that can be applied to it. So that is what all that information we just associated with it by making those headers and by associating those IDs. That'll actually be announced as the screen reader's navigating through it. They'll be able to refer back to that information and not just have no idea what this 135 is randomly doing in this table. So that's the gist of it. Now we'd also need to do the same thing for these subheaders as well. So for Susan, Bill, and Jeff in January through, or the months of the year, we would need to associate those with their headers as well to make this, to fully complete the picture. So let's do that for January. And we're gonna add first quarter and, oh, I'm sorry, just first quarter. I don't need to add anything else. Can't find that one right now. Okay. Now we clicked OK on that. All right, so you would need to continue that throughout the rest of these table data cells and these subheader cells, the names of the months and the names of the individuals. And then you'd be fully set. And you'd be assured that anybody encountering this with a screen reader of any age or anything like that could read your table, hopefully. Okay. And I'm Silas. I've got I've got a couple of questions. Are header IDs a must or a may? I would say if you have a really complex table, that's a must. Like I said, with more simple tables, I think they do a pretty good job of figuring it out on their own. But if you go ahead and do the work, it'll just ensure it. And so this one, you know, since it doesn't have a whole bunch of row and column headers, like it might be okay. But it's just if you kind of, you can also always go over with the screen reader. If you're finding that there are things that it's missing or not getting associated properly, that's when you know you really need to add the header cells. I'm sorry, the header IDs. All right, let's see. Scope for more questions here. I think I saw a question about, okay, there it is. So is there an accessible way to include images within a table? If you add alt text to an image, it should actually be read out within a table. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure what your use case is. If you want to follow up with me on that later, or if you want to ask a question about what kind of images you're trying to include in a table specifically, I might be able to give you a better answer. Okay. All right, so let me shift back to my PowerPoint real quick. I've included 2 resources here. Unfortunately, the resources on PDF accessibility are pretty scant. So to kind of reinforce the structure that we talked about today, you can look back at the W3C techniques for PDFs. So I've included the link for lists and tables specifically. They also have some things in there if you want to get into header IDs and things like that. They have some resources within that list that these are from that you can look at as well. And I wanted to remind everyone that their recordings are should be available at some point on the AT3 ICT Community of Practice page. And we have one more session, which is on June 16th, and that is on PDF form. So We're just adding another layer to what we've kind of already learned. So all of this stuff can be applicable within forms. You're just kind of adding one more thing to think about. And if any of you need to hop off, I appreciate your attention. My contact information is below. It's lissa.prince@okstate.edu. And now I'll just open it back up for any questions that you have left over. And again, thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, so I've got a question in the Q&A. Can you send or paste a link to the PDF UA standards? I can get that to you. I don't currently know where they are, but I can definitely follow up with that, and we can post them on the ACT, or I'm sorry, the AT3 website when we're posting the rest of the stuff. Oh, I'm sorry, Christina, if you're still on, I do have an answer to your question since we, it looks like we have some time. So Christina asked if it's okay to have more than one heading, one tag in a document. So that standard typically applies, and I wouldn't say it's a standard, it's more of a best practice. But web pages, we're told to only have one header, heading one. I think that's actually also changing. So you might start hearing more different information about that on web pages specifically, but within documents, it's pretty much been the norm that you can have more than one heading one. And most people, I think, make the title a heading one, the subtitle a heading two, and then kind of start their main body content with a heading one below that. So I think that's totally fine. I think the most important thing when it comes to headings is to keep them consistent. So if you have something that's, you know, a main body of the document, that really needs to be a heading one, and it doesn't need to be, or something at a similar level doesn't need to be marked as a heading level two later on. So that's the most important thing. Sorry, that was a bumbling answer, but hope I got you what you needed. We have a couple more Q&As. Tracy, your question, do I know of a technology that creates a transcript of what a screen reader would read out to a user? Let's see, on the Mac voiceover program, you actually can turn on a setting that shows what's being read. And with NVDA, you can do the same thing, but it sort of scans as it's going, so it's not necessarily going to be just something you can click a button and create. Now, we'll say the Patch Yellow group has a tool that sort of does that. I'm not sure it'd be a full transcript, and I cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's, see if I can. Let me see if I can find it real quick. That's not what I want. Or if you'll stay on just a second, Tracy, I think I can get you that real quick. And let me answer Stephanie's question. In the table for the data, can you multiple select rows, columns to label at one time, or do you have to update the labels for each cell? When you are in the, I'm assuming you're asking about the tag row, you can multiple select those to make them headings in the tag tree as well. And you can also multiple select them in the table editor. So I would recommend if you're first getting into a table and you want to mark all the headers at one go, then select all of them for the row and the columns, and then mark them as headers, but don't mark them as row or column scope yet. But yes, you can do that in both. Yes, Tracy, JAWS Inspect, that is right. I'm glad you were able to Google that. But I think it costs a fair amount, and we haven't actually gotten to play with it, so I'm not exactly sure all of what it does, but it does look pretty neat, and if it would meet your need, I think it's the only product like that on the market right now. All right, well, looks like I can close out this room, but again, I really appreciate you guys, and let me know if you have questions, or any of you that are still on. I should have mentioned this sooner, but if you happen to want to send me a PDF to check, kind of using this document as homework, feel free. I'd be happy to kind of see what you did and help you out if you have trouble.